Welcome back to Radical Grace Radio. I can tell you that us doing video opens up some extra stuff because YouTube has this huge audio library that I can draw from for bump music and whatever else.
Yes.
And some of these are really kind of nice.
Yeah.
I couldn't have done better myself. Which, I used to spend a lot of time doing it myself and finding ways to get things done, But you sound like you're getting things done up in...
Oh yeah, we've got I've got my of course we just came off of all of us did not that long ago Holy Week and Easter, and we're still in the season of Easter. But there's been other things. Some people, including my wife, have been sick at and not with what you've got, but some bug going around, and we're also trying to do some cool things here. With regard to, I guess you could generally call it outreach or making an intentional effort to welcome visitors and do more in that area. So it's kind of an interesting time to be around here, and we've got some people who are getting very excited about it. So I'm really glad for them, and I'm glad for myself to be here to be part of it. But one of the things that we talked about in a Sunday school lesson that was for adults that was this past Sunday, and again, my wife was a bit under the weather and she wasn't able to be part of it, and I think she would have liked to be a part of it because it's something that a lot of Lutheran women will resonate to this right away. And now there's a reason why I'm saying Lutheran women is that this is the familiar. We're going to look at Luke 21 and the familiar story of the widow and her contribution to the temple. Her widow's mite, right? She's going to.
Yeah, that's what's usually known as. Yeah,
usually called that. And the reason why I talk about Lutheran women is that there's a service organization that is comprised chiefly of women, although there are fellas that have some kinds of roles in it, but it's called the Lutheran Women's Missionary League for a reason. And they make a lot of wonderful things happen that would otherwise not really be able to go forward. And so God bless the women of the Lutheran Women's Missionary League, the LWML. Anyway, the reason they come up is that, and they have these little boxes that aren't very big, but they put spare change. They call them mite boxes. Okay, they put their little mites in their pocket change. Sometimes they'll fold up a 5 or a 10 and stick that in there just to pump it up a little bit. But then they collect all these little mite boxes that have just small contributions that were made over time, and together though all these women they find that it really adds up, and they wind up being able to donate to and support other kinds of ministries to the tune really of like thousands and tens of thousands of dollars, because all those small mites do add up. So yeah. I thought, she probably would have liked to have been part of that, when we went over this ground, although I know she's heard me talk about it before. So anyway, I'd like to have the listeners turn to Luke 21. But while you're turning, Matthew, I'm not really feeling like I'm putting you on the spot because you already know this. So kind of in general, before we read what it's talking about, just say what the story is as you sort of remember it, the outline of it.
The story of specifically that?
Of the women's, with the mites.
Yeah. Well, Jesus is, a lot of the time what you see is, portrayed in like movies or whatever else, is Jesus is sort of watching as people, finely dressed people walk up and they drop their gifts and everything into, a big collection kind of plate or box, barrel or whatever. And in line with them is usually this sort of impoverished looking woman. Right. And she comes up and she lays 2 little coins on top of the stuff like that. And a lot of the time it's portrayed as people sort of turn their nose up as, look what she did, and then Jesus makes this point about, I tell you the truth, she has put more than all of the rest of them have put in. For
That's
out of her
right.
poverty, out of her poverty, she gave all
Okay.
that she had. Yeah,
And that's you know you're accurate. We're going to look at it, and so quite often the way that her character is portrayed or understood is that here she's showing herself to be very faithful, right?
yeah,
Because the reasoning is that well that when you don't have much, when you have to worry a little bit about uh, how you're going to pay for things, and then quite often the way the story is presented is that she doesn't have any other money, right? She's just basically people would say, well, she's down to her last two little copper coins.
hmm
And so, what might be the choice that you would, if you're imagining what's going on in her head, in that case, what might be the choice in her head, as far as I could do this or I could do that?
Well, I could put the money in, or I could eat.
Or maybe I put in one of the two coins,
Yeah,
right? And
right.
so maybe I could hold back a little bit for myself because I have needs too, and so oftentimes when people are telling her story, what they're saying about her is that look how faithful she was. Excuse me. That it must have taken great faith on her part to just trust God that, this is the right thing to do. And I want to show that I'm all in, basically. And so she offers everything that she can, all she had to live on, puts that in, and well, but she's, again, you pointed out, with all these other people who are also making their contributions. Of course, in terms of just strict amounts, other people are putting in considerably more, right? I mean, in terms of what the gift value is monetarily, and yet Jesus sees that really her gift means more, right? And so he recognizes that, and so well, again, the idea is that, and she's being commended, and so a lot of times when this gets preached on in different churches, the upshot of it'll be you should be more like that faithful widow. You maybe ought to give all you can give more than you're giving, and have no thought to how this is going to affect you because God's going to take care of you. And He's taking care of this widow, and she trusted in Him, and she put in the very last that she had. So you could do the same, and that would be good, right? Isn't that how it seems like it's presented? And well, I don't know. I mean, let's go ahead and now that we've kind of talked around how we usually hear this story presented, would you read the story beginning at Luke 21 and verse 1, and it's really 1 through 4 is the part we're looking at.
This whole big long thing. I don't know if I can do that. It's real.
Wait,
It's
wait.
super long. I mean, anyway.
Oh, you're being facetious. Okay, got it.
Sometimes we have really
That's
long things. See if I can get through it without stumbling. As
right.
Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury, and he also saw a poor widow put in two very small copper coins. Truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had to live on.
Okay.
Here
And
endeth the
so,
lesson.
and yeah, there, and here ended the lesson. That's right. One of the first things you noticed, and you pointed it out, is that when you actually read it, four whole verses long, and not long rambling verses. Some of them are fairly short verses. The whole narration is kind of a short story. And well, the reason it matters is that does it say a lot about explicitly, does it say a lot in the story about what her mental or emotional or spiritual state was?
No,
No, it doesn't. Um, and for all the things that have been said, I'm not trying to detract from this widow. Obviously, I wouldn't, but all the things that have been said about, you know, in some cases, how much faith it must have been on her part to give like this. one of the things I notice is that Jesus doesn't really single out her faith. I mean, not explicitly. You can say, well, he observes or he recognizes that she is giving abundantly, but out of her poverty, right? That
Right.
that's why the value of her gift is so much in relative terms. It's a bigger gift than the other people were putting in. And so, Jesus, and of course, we know also, we should just state this because it's obvious, is that this is happening in Jerusalem. Actually, it's happening during the week of Holy Week, right after the triumphal entry, but before Maundy Thursday. That's when this is taking place. And so he's in Jerusalem, obviously near the temple, physically near the temple, because he can look across and he can see where people are making their donations to the temple. They're putting it into this offering box, and that's where he sees the rich putting in their gifts, and also this woman putting in her gifts. But it doesn't, other than that information about where this is happening, it really doesn't go into a lot of stuff. A lot of it now doesn't mean that the things that we added to the story to kind of flesh it out, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. What it does mean though is that it's like pure conjecture on our part. And well, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, not really, as long as, this is very important, folks, as long as you know you're doing it right, you can bring some stuff in with you and say, okay, well, this is what I think is going on, and it makes the story sound like it flows and gives a rationale to it, but it's conjecture. You don't know that that's where she's coming from. You in your mind say, if I were in that position, and you think you understand her position, you might say, well, I would really be torn between putting in everything and maybe saying, well, God will understand if I only give one coin or don't give any coins or whatever I'm trying to do, because if it were me, I might have that torn feeling, right? That's how people look at it, for good reason, if they were in that position. So they're making some assumptions about her and her situation. Now, I'm going to make the story automatically. I'm going to make it very different. I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the scriptural facts as they are. I'm not going to change the Bible, for goodness sake, but my conjecture, my ideas about, okay, well, maybe what's going on, you know, are just going to be different, and it's going to change the whole tone of the story. Now, I'm going to do that, and then later on, I'm going to tell you what I really think is going on, but which is a third thing entirely. But right now, we've got a story about, she's, as it's typically understood, she's she's just determined. She's going to dare to do it, and it's a struggle, and maybe she's even a little bit fearful about it, but she's faithful, and that overcomes her fear, and she does it anyway. Good for her, right? So here's my story. Different conjectures, but she's she is a poor widow. But I in my story, she's not down to her last couple coins to live on. Like, whatever she had before she became a widow, it's been all consumed, and now she barely has anything. I'm my widow, at least in my story, has a very different situation. She doesn't have any money, hasn't had any money maybe for a while. She just, like, there's no question about what she still has left or what she's down to. She just doesn't have money, period. And you say, well, okay, how would she live at all then? And the answer would be, you'd be surprised how resourceful people can really demonstrate that they know how to be survivors, right? They can well, sometimes they have all different kinds of ways that they can make do and get by without having actually money. They can, sometimes they have a dinner invitation to, come over for dinner tonight. Sometimes it's a matter of, I baked too much bread, so Here, like, we some of it's going to spoil before we can eat it, so take a couple loaves. This all depends on her having some circle of people who kind of at least care about her, but that oftentimes that's the case. And maybe, well, maybe she's not sleeping on the streets, or under bridges. Maybe she's, you know, with the equivalent of found a couch she can crash on. Maybe it's not the same house every single time, but maybe there's ways that she can get by, and one way or another, and not feel like she's a burden, but people are trying to kind of look out for her, and she doesn't have any money. So are her immediate needs being met? Well, in my case, in my story, they are. Her basic needs, her basic physical needs. But here's something she doesn't have being met. Here's something she can't do that other people can do in her community, and maybe she used to be able to do. And that is, if you have money, you can participate in the offering box. You can give something to the temple treasury. And that is when you give gifts, in this case, it'd be the temple treasury. And in our day, it wouldn't, there's no temple, but there's other ways that you can give to the Lord. And that is considered from God's point of view as an act of worship. That is, especially if you're giving it with a cheerful heart, right? That is real worship. It's not the only kind of worship, but it is an aspect. It's a real aspect of worship, and God certainly considers our gifts and our offerings to be worshipful acts on our part. So, but if you don't have any money, you can't participate, right? And maybe before she was widowed, maybe she and her husband did have money, and they were like just anybody else. They had a certain amount that they were giving, sort of regularly, and they'd get in line, they'd drop it in, and then they wouldn't think about it because it wasn't relative to their what they had to live on. It wasn't that great. In my story, why can't it be this way? But in my story right now, she has nothing, not a thing. She can't participate, and everybody else can. And so she's excluded in a way that, well, that is, well, you can't help but feel like, oh, I guess I'm not anybody now. I can't even participate in this aspect. But then one day in my story, she comes across 2 coins, or they are given to her, or she gives something that she has that she doesn't need anymore, and somebody buys it from her for 2 small coins. It's a small trivial thing, but it's still something. And now she's got in her tight little fist, she's got some cold hard cash. It's just 2 small copper coins, but it lets her do something that she hasn't been able to do in a long, long, long time. And that is, now she can also get in the line, and she can also come up to the offering box, and she can put her coins in. That's her gift, her offering to the Lord. And that's a participation in the worship life of Israel that she perhaps has been missing ever since who knows how long. But was the last time she was able to participate like that. In my story, she's not struggling. What should I do? In my story, she's like, I got some money. I get to do this now. It's about joy. It's like, I get to participate. And that's something that is, well, already it sounds more like a better story. I mean, I'll pit my widow's story against your widow's story any day of the week, because mine isn't giving grudgingly or like, I'm a little bit torn. I'm a lot torn. No, my widow isn't torn at all. It's just like, I get to do this, and it's so exciting. And there's something joyful about it. And there's something genuinely worshipful about it, because God truly, how does the verse go? You know it. God loves a what kind of
Cheerful
giver?
giver. Yeah.
A cheerful giver, right?
Right.
So in my story, she's a cheerful giver. She's about as happy as you can be to be able to put in her 2 small coins. And so, well, yeah, I mean, it's a lot compared to what she has. She doesn't have any other money, but she puts it all in. not even a hesitancy. This is something that's a big deal for her because now she's just like all the other people in her community. For a brief amount of time, she's participating just as they are able to regularly participate. So I think my story is better. But I don't think, now, having said that, my story is better. It's not any necessarily any more true. I mean, I floated in all these background stories about her, but everybody else does too. So why can't I do mine? You do you, I'll do mine. And, they're all going beyond what it says in this text. They all the stories that try to explain maybe what she's feeling, maybe what's going on. Mine are just, well, I think they lend themselves to a happier ending or at least a happier story. And so, okay, so that's, I just pit my story against all the other stories. And I don't think though that makes it actually what this is about. I mean, it's a cool story, bro. But but I don't think that's
But
really I don't really think that's what's going on. So
okay,
I
if that's the case, then what is? I mean,
okay,
your story fits the facts just as well as anybody else. It's almost
yeah.
like a detective thing going on here.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing: is so humor me with this. We started off at chapter 21 and where the story begins, and
Right.
but let's just and we did say something about the context. We did say that this is in the temple, where Jesus can see this all going on. What I'd like you to do is go back up to 20. Okay, go to 20, and there's questions that are being asked of him, and there's these different people trying to test him, and but after a while, after they try to test him with questions about the resurrection and about marriage and about different things, he gets to where he's kind of had enough of this, and then at 20 chapter 20 and verse 45, would you read from 45 to the end of the chapter if you have it in front of you?
I do. While all the people were listening, Jesus said to his disciples, "Beware the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely."
Right. So he's saying this, okay, ostensibly he's saying this to his disciples, but he knows that all the people around him, including these guys in the long robes, they can
They
all
can
hear
hear
what
him.
he's saying. It's not like I'm whispering it. So he's making known exactly what he thinks about their pretense. And the crowd is hearing this too, and he calls them out. You want to watch out for these guys because okay, so here's the thing you got to know about scribes. So this is true not just about them, but if you are a resident of Jerusalem, and there's a good likelihood in one way or another your livelihood is somehow tied to the temple and the business aspects of the temple, because like any enterprise, they've got revenues coming in, they've got also expenses, and there's all kinds of things where people are, I won't say they're skimming money, but there is certainly ways that you can, if you get the temple contract for wine, okay, that's a valuable contract. And you think, well, he's making something up. No, I'm not completely, because one of the reasons why, from the point of view of somebody who's in the first century in Jerusalem, one of the advantages of being appointed by your Roman overlords to be the temple high priest is, you think, well, it's a religious thing. It's kind of important to the people, the culture. It is. But here's something else. The temple high priest, he has the exclusive contract for all the sheep that will be used in the sacrifice. So when people come in and they say, I brought my own sheep, and somebody looks it over and says, yeah, but it's too bad because it kind of has this blemish. Tell you what, We'll take this one off your hands. I'll give you a good deal on this other sheep. The other sheep really do come from sheepfolds that are owned by the
Mhm,
chief priest, and so
mhm.
the high priest. This is kind of a way to, well, to have a side hustle, you might say, and
Well, you
it's
come out ahead,
you definitely come out ahead if you're
way ahead.
if you're well connected with the temple. And all these scribes, for the most part, are scribes. The way to think about scribe in the first century is there's essentially lawyers, and there's all kinds of people who practice law. It's not just about trial law and defending the innocent. Um, Lawyers write contracts. Lawyers write laws. Lawyers regulate things. Lawyers, think about all the politicians today that, yeah, they're chiefly politicians now, but ostensibly they were just lawyers to begin with, and they worked their way up because they were connected. Don't think it's that different back then. Lawyers are, they're doing all right, but they're doing all right because the temple brings in money from everywhere, and so the temple is it's a cash cow, right? I mean, this is going to sound a little ridiculous or a little crude. I don't want it to, but it's in a way everybody who's anybody in Jerusalem is one way or another kind of sucking on the teat of the temple and the whole enterprise. So, and they're all kind of doing well for themselves. And that's why they got the long robes, and that's why they get the places of honor. And and what does Jesus say about what else they're doing? He says they devour widows' houses, right?
Yeah.
They're robbing, they're bleeding them white, basically. And
There's a
well,
saying I haven't heard in a while.
well, the thing about the widows is it just a coincidence that widows and widows' houses make an appearance in chapter 20, verse 47, the last verse of the chapter, and then you get to chapter 21, and who shows up as a character immediately?
And then we
The
have to
widow.
remind people also that the chapter breaks are not from the first century.
That's right. They added them later. So the widow now is the one who's actually has, in a sense, put in her whole um, livelihood, if you can look at it that way. And for what? Because the temple tells her, you want to do this. You should give generously to God. You should do this for God. Okay. All right, so she does what she has to do or does what she can do. Maybe she's joyful about it, like my story says, but in any case, is the story really about how it's important to be a faithful uh, widow, a faithful giver who, without unselfishly and faithfully gives all you can? Or is the point really about the people who are already rich and powerful find it easy to take advantage of certain other people, including but not limited to poor widows? Like they're a, they're easy pickings. You
A
can
story about how not to be manipulative and take, the widows for everything they got.
And the reason why I think that this is definitely the real meaning is that later, the very next section of Luke 21 is the next thing they're talking about the temple and how it looks so great and adorned with all these cool stones. And he says, you know, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. He prophesies the destruction of the temple. And it's easy to see why. If all these people who are on the take are using the temple, using God's name to put the squeeze on God's own people that he cares about, including the weak and the widows and the people who can't really so much stand up for themselves. If they're easy to manipulate and they're doing it using the temple as the pretense, well, how is God going to let that go on? I mean, he won't. I mean, he'll put a stop to that. If they won't repent, and they don't, well, then the only thing you can do is you tear the thing down, because that can't go on. I think that's exactly what you see happening in this story. Is Here's the reason why, because the temple is doing these kinds of things. Here's the reason, among other reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why an end's got to come to this. And well, you know, who you going to say is wrong? You know, Jesus seems to size it up pretty accurately, and that's what I think that's what I think this story is really doing in here. It's showing how the Lord sees through a lot of the pretense.
So
Yeah.
I have a question. Did you choose to do this as the back half before we had the inclusion of the story in the news roll about predatory lending?
Yes, I didn't. I did not look at the
Because I had no
predatory,
idea you were going to talk about that today.
and I had no
Um,
idea that in the news roll was about predatory lending. But
yeah.
you
Well,
know,
I mean, only in this case, it's not predatory lending; it's predatory taking
yeah,
through
yeah, it's
manipulation. I mean, there's a
that's how
way
it
in
looks to
which
me.
the way they teach this all over the place is actually the manipulative thing to do. To say that, like, out of your poverty, you should be willing to give everything, and it's not even about that. It's about, see, these guys, they got
Yeah, look at these
plenty.
guys. Look how they are without even caring or thinking about the effect they're having.
Right.
They're simply they're devouring widows' houses. That's exactly what they're doing.
Devouring up
So,
the widows, when the fact of the matter is the widows are the ones that need taken care of.
right.
And with that, thanks for listening to Radical Grace Radio today, and may God bless you.